Hello and welcome back to the Stronghold. I'm the Magi, and today we are talking about potentially one of the most important topics of the season. That is the budget deck tier list. And although status quo is the phrase of the day, that doesn't mean there aren't things to talk about or plans to be made. So stay tuned. But before we get into all that, my Amazon Prime members, listen up. You have a free Twitch sub burning a hole in your digital pocket every month. And you can use that to support the Stronghold and fuel the creation flames of more budget magic content. It's a quick and easy way to make a difference without spending anything extra. And if you don't already have Amazon Prime, did you know you could get up to 6 months absolutely free? I mean, why would we not check this out? Through the link in the description. I mean, let's face it, Amazon has a lot of resources, but they're not going to use it to make budget-oriented Magic the Gathering content unless you send it my way. Now, what were we talking about? Oh yeah, right. Alright, so we know from last season that Etherdrift really did not add very much to the budget deck discussion. Well, for various reasons that I won't go into. And we're only 12 days into the Dragonstorm, so quite a lot remains to be seen. Dragonstorm's somewhat unique 5 3-color archetypes did not really hold a lot of promise for budget players. 3-color mana bases can be extremely challenging to budget players. And of course, with only 5 different archetypes to choose from, how many did we really expect to walk away with? Well, the interesting thing is there are 2 thus far looking to hold some real promise, what I call Simply Teamer and Simply Mardu. The real question here is, does the added instability of the 3rd color get justified by the performance of the deck when compared to its 2-color counterparts? In other words, are you simply better playing something like Boros tokens or Gruul Power 4 or better? And really only time will tell on this. The Abzan +1/+1 counters theme has not panned out well in both limited and standard constructed, but I do think it holds more potential promise in those older Eternal formats where there is more to draw on for the internal synergy. And of course, both Jeskai and Sultai hold a control option that, while certainly has potential, is very often not budget friendly. If we step back from budgetary concerns for a moment and take a look at the broader standard best of 1 meta, well, we're going to see some familiar things here, like Mono Red being the most played deck in the format with a pretty outstanding 59% win rate. Of course, the ubiquitous Mono Black for 3 years now? Now at about 8.4% of the meta and a 56% win rate. So a little bit of a slip there on the win rate. Boros, a deck we've talked about quite a bit from a budget perspective, 5.4% with a 60% win rate. We've got Azorius, a newcomer on the block, the Izzet Prowess deck, 3.1% of the meta and likely to grow, and a 57% win rate. That is definitely one to keep an eye on. Esper Pixie continues to get different cards, different iterations, and holding just under 3% of the meta with, again, a 57% win rate. Then we see Orzhov Bats, and interestingly, the 4-color Beans decks down to just over 2% of the meta, and we see their win rates again slipping below that crucial 55%. If we take a closer look at the Izzet Cutter deck that is, well, kind of all the rage here in the first couple of weeks, well, the first thing you're going to see is that I excluded the detail on the meta land base, because I think we all know at this point that the land base is someplace that we can save some wild cards, at least temporarily, and then grow into more expensive versions of the mana base. Secondly, you're going to see that this deck is made up mostly of commons and uncommons. And when we really dial in on the rares, you're going to notice Storm Chaser's Talent, which we've talked about before for the Pixie pickup decks, as well as Slickshot Show Off, which has been kind of an all-star card in various prowess builds, despite not having the word prowess on the card. Of course, the newcomer here is the Cory Steel Cutter. And, well, I think this card is pretty outstanding. More on that in just a moment. Ghost Vacuum is also in here as a one of rare. I think that is kind of a meta card. Maybe you want to run it, maybe you don't. I think your experience will vary. Alright, so let's talk about mono red for a moment, because at this point there's really no reason to think that Monastery Swiftspear is going to continue in standard post the upcoming expected rotation at the end of July. And that leaves a lot of questions about what mono red is going to look like in standard moving forward. Another likely alternative is that Goblins is going to take the forefront in some sort of red-based deck. In either case, Cory Steel Cutter, a 2-mana artifact equipment that I'm sure you're all familiar with, is likely going to be a strong part of whatever deck ends up filling this void. Additionally, the really good news is Cory Steel Cutter is a pretty budget-friendly card. Not only is it available to us through the usual ways, but it's also available to us in the mono red discard pack through the TDM jump-in. Even better, the alternate rare for that card is Stadium Headliner, which, you guessed it, is a pretty capable goblin in his own right. There are a number of factors that I consider when I'm evaluating these decks. Of course, first and foremost is how playable is the deck, because if it's not going to help you grind out those daily wins, it's probably not an ideal candidate. Secondly, how much support does this deck get from things like your starter decks, your jump-in resources, and just following the plan? Next up, a deck needs to be timely, whether that is about those resources and how likely you are to continue collecting those resources, or is the deck due for a ban, or maybe it's coming up on its rotation. And of course, formats play a factor as well. If a deck is likely to do something in a non-standard format, whether that is Alchemy, Eternal formats, or one of the Brawl bases, it's good to have flexible deck concepts. One thing you'll notice that isn't here is how fun a deck is, because fun is a very subjective thing, and I'm not here to tell you the quote-unquote right way to have fun. You're going to need to figure that out for yourself. When I'm doing evaluations, I like to use what I lovingly refer to as the Eastwood Rating system, breaking your choices down into 3 easy categories: the good, the bad, and the ugly. Good decks are just that. These are what represent your best daily grinder decks, and the best places for you to invest your resources to get the optimal result to effort ratios. These decks tend to be a full standard deviation mathematically above the moving average of all the decks that we're looking at. Bad decks, on the other hand, tend to be a little more tongue-in-cheek as far as the naming convention. These decks are, in fact, centered around that moving average of all the other decks. And despite what the name might imply, these decks are still perfectly playable. I just wouldn't necessarily recommend putting a lot of resources into these decks because they're just not as well positioned as the good right now. But of course, as card pools and metas change, these could very easily shift up or down the spectrum. And finally, ugly decks are sadly just that. Although these might have been in-season darlings, they just didn't pan out the way they wanted to, and it's not really worth investing resources into these decks. But if you already have them and enjoy them, there's really no harm in playing these existing decks. They just don't seem to have a pathway to move out of this particular category, although from time to time you might see one of these move up. All right, before we talk about the very best of the best, I have to admit, with over 30 budget decks being tracked right now, I am definitely looking forward to the upcoming rotation and cutting this list down and getting a little bit more focused. But that having been said, let's talk about what I think are really the best places to be investing as a budget player right now. First off, we've got the various tribal decks as presented in Foundations. These are probably going to be tier 1 forever and ever. Of course, we're focused on elves, cats, and the aforementioned goblins. My own deck, Best of Budget Boros, continues to do exceedingly well. Maybe the best win rate I've seen on a budget deck here in quite some time. But of course, it is going to lose some key cards in rotation. But even when they go out of standard, I think they will never go out of style in Eternal formats. I'm putting the win rate on this as 80%, although I have versions of the deck posting as high as 92%. The deck is really that good. People know it, and once you start going off with it, they don't stick around. You get a lot of wins to just scoop out, and the deck doesn't even have to prove itself. Of course, Alendra Brawl and the broader, more standard-based deck, the Vampire Life Gain, still doing very, very well. If you're going to have one Brawl deck built from standard, I would say Alendra is the thing to do. And of course, Blue-White Flyers, I haven't had as much time to play it here because, well, the other decks and the new experimental stuff is taking up the majority of my time. But that is a solid classic that should pretty much always do well, although occasionally it needs tinkering from the starter just to get some of the card counts right. And of course, the starter mana bases are all, well, questionable. As you can see, none of the new decks this season are showing up at tier 1. They are all pretty middle of the road tier 2. So there it is, guys. Those are my brief thoughts on the best budget decks to be building right now and, of course, making investments into. Matt, I want you to know that, as usual, the complete budget deck tier list is available through a link to my Patreon down in the doobly-doo. And while you don't have to be a supporting patron, it is always appreciated. And of course, I want to take this opportunity to thank my supporting patrons, because being a small content creator comes with big bills. And I just couldn't do everything that I do without their monthly support. Thanks, guys. And of course, if you enjoyed this video and found it helpful in your arena experience, we have a few suggestions for what you could watch next.